When I was still a child, a presentation came to our school. As we gathered and sat on the gymnasium floor, they spoke to us about the human rights, human freedom, and the United Nations. Even as a child, I remember turning to the girl next to me and cynically saying, "But it's just a piece of paper. It can't do anything." She laughed and agreed. As I grew up, I heard many times about the failings of the United Nations, of the times in history it did not achieve its goals and big ideals, or was incapable of stopping raw human suffering and horrors. Many saw it as an inept government above the government, municipal, federal, national, and now international. Another layer of complexity and control, or stupidity and bureaucracy, further isolating the average human life. Some paranoid types saw this as the establishment of a new world order. But when faced with the messy history, it seems to be a pretty bad thing to ascribe an order to. The UN had achieved a great number of good deeds, in medicine, in world hunger, in clean water and education, but the shadows of the darkest events hung long over it. The reality, though, is that it was only really as its namesake would say it was. A United Nations, a whole created from those parts, a combination of the many. Thus, when tragedy occurs, though the United Nations receive the blame, the cancer and rot often happened well before, at the national level. And at the level of national interest, selfish and selfless acts combine and contradict themselves constantly. In Rwanda, a web of internal national matters had escalated. The racial tension, stoked and building for decades. This must simply be one of those African ethnic tribal things many people elsewhere likely told themselves early on. But at the same time, the Belgians, such as the members of the Christian Democratic Party, these ex-colonial rulers, pressured the nation. For them, Rwanda was not just a nation, but the supposed battleground between communist, atheist Tutsi rebels and the democratic, Christian Hutu government. This was simply a new false dichotomy, a new good and bad to use to control Rwanda. Much like the racial dichotomy of Hutu and Tutsi, they contorted and crafted it to fit their colonial needs. And at the same time, France only ever increased their military exports in Rwanda. In the early 90s, millions in arms and aid was given to the Hutu government, which would later use it to instigate the same genocide on the Tutsi. To maintain their Francafrique, their neo-colonial zone, against Russian-backed rebel groups in contest of Africa. And it went even further. This was a close partnership. Jean-Christophe Mitterrand, son of the late French president, was not only good friends with the son of the late president Habyarimana of Rwanda, but he also advised his father on Rwanda and helped encourage these arms deals. Ironically, it was very possibly a French-sold, man-portable anti-air missile, which would be used to shoot down President Habyarimana's plane. The act that the extremist Hutu would blame on the Tutsi as an excuse to start the very genocide. And during that genocide, France would use its paratroopers and Foreign Legion with Belgian assistance to basically rescue its own people, French expats, while leaving their Tutsi friends, gardeners, drivers, and so on, to their deaths at the hands of the Hutu. All the while, America, wanting to avoid another Black Hawk Down, and with no motivation to get involved in a country it had little political or economic benefit from, ignored the early reports of genocide. Much like the UK and many other nations, it was all too little too late. Unlike France, it had not helped create the genocide. Instead, here, national self-interest had done nothing to prevent it. Now they incompetently aided the Hutu government, the perpetrators of the genocide, to escape into Zaire, and sent their foreign secretaries to hold small children and look unhappy at mass graves. So by the time Canadian General Romeo Dallaire was in command of the United Nations UNAMIR force, what could he do? His hands were tied politically and nationally, and he was not allowed to stop the trucks filled with machetes sold to Rwanda from France. Dallaire knew what the Hutu were going to do with those machetes. He called General Jean-Pierre Houchon, who was in charge of the French military forces in Rwanda. In the end, he did not get a reply, though much of this is not told in any classroom commonly. All boiled down to simply mourning the genocide as if it were an unusually large earthquake. No way to tell its causes without revealing the disgusting web. And so, what from the outside is simplified down to racism against Africans or blamed on the incompetent United Nations, when in truth was much less black and white and much less simple. A tangle of national self-interest, of political interests, of economic interests. And who held them? Nations. The things at the base of the foundation of that thing that is the UN. And so we come 30 years forward, to that time again. UN MOSAF. Why had it been able to do these things, whereas others like UNAMIR had not? Leo Tolstoy wrote the answer. All good families are alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Put simply, when those national interests overlapped, when the political and economic interests were polarized towards a goal, things could work very, very well. UN MOSAF, its primary members had all something to gain. France, the UK, Canada, the United States, Italy, and Japan. France had, and still has, its Francafrique, its need to be stable, to have a stable meta-region in Africa, and beyond that, the French ego in the Francosphere and its preservation. The UK had, is, and was to continue its strange identity crisis, an empire in decline as so across many human lifetimes. It was still an economic powerhouse by any standard. Perhaps it felt pressured, or perhaps it simply wanted to keep its image of a world power steadfast. Canada had its own priorities. Once, peacekeeping had been a pillar of Canadian identity, a nation whose entire foreign involvement was never for colonialism or expansion. But Bosnia, Somalia, and yes, Rwanda, had done much to sour that notion. In the direct sense, it had also desired more sway and influence politically, even though most would laugh at the idea. It had made an attempt for the UN Security Council seat. Canada had much to gain in the coming years. It had resources, space, and so on, and perhaps making some small amends for UNAMIR's failure was not also so terrible. The US hardly needed a reason. They fight because fighting has become them. They have the means, the resources, and the knowledge. They are still the superpower. No one would begrudge the scale of help they could offer. Behind that, other political motives lurked, but for now they lay dormant. Italy was much like Canada, a nation in the background, but in spite of their reputation for corruption politically, they had economically surpassed Russia in GDP. Their naval fleet was the largest and most capable in the Mediterranean. For them, UN MOSAF meant an end or a decrease to waves of migrants, either from climate or from war, that would wash up or drown on their shores. Another mutual benefit, nationally selfish but aligned to the common goal. And Japan? Article 9's power had been slipping for decade after decade. Japan had an intense internal conflict, one of a neo-nationalism and desire for expanding vitality, hitting head-on its adamant pacifist, anti-war public opinion. For UN MOSAF, it was not about any specific economic gain, so much as it was a means of trying to crack its old tight shell of absolute pacifism and flex some new muscles towards its influence. And so that was the aligning trend. For the US, UK, and France, it was a matter of maintaining things. For Italy, Japan, and Canada, it was a matter of building out their influence and goals. And so, as the threats of climate crisis, political instability, disease, and war aligned their destructive energies in that time against the human species, these nations, and others with them, out of national self-interest or towards some gain, would unite to wield the combined force of UN MOSAF as their sword in defense against that time. The smallest effective element of any army is the soldier. Though the Mecha may have aspects of the human soldier, they cannot replace that, just as they cannot replace the tank. The Mecha must then find its niche in working together in the combined arm space to earn its fate. Infantry supporting machines, and machines supporting infantry. To that end, the Buster Brigade was developed, the 9th Mechanized Humanoid's primary formation setup. Three battalions of infantry: Engineer Battalion, Artillery Battalion, Supply Battalion, HQ, and finally, the Mecha March. This is the composition of the Buster Brigade. For that day, I and the 2 other machines of the 1st March, Amber Team, were combined with the 1st Infantry Battalion. This created the effective combat subunit of the Buster Brigade, that is, the Buster Battalion. Across 1 kilometer-wide stretch, we were dispersed.
All Terranus elements, advance and maintain dispersion.
I was in the most important flank, the left. Ahead of us lay roughly 10 kilometers in which the enemy was positioned. There was only one objective of the Buster Battalion: break these positions and hold the advance. Speed would be everything. Mecha are highly mobile, therefore, the Buster Brigade is highly mobile. Our Buster Battalion would be getting a UAV support from the brigade level assets.
Be advised, possible enemy contact. Forward elements try to get eyes on.
UAVs are not perfect. Ground cover can still obscure and hide enemy forces.
Confirmed. I repeat, enemy battle line is confirmed.
So the scouts went out first. They would dismount and go on foot to acquire visual. This was just the first enemy line. We had to smash it and push through quickly.
All Alpha Victors dismount. Proceed to engage. Amber 1, move into position.
Operation Elise had been messy and rough. I had been green and unsupported. The enemy was luckily much rougher and messier. But you can't rely on luck to win you battles. The coordination and practice put into play here might seem overkill when those we were going up against were so poorly equipped. But it was more than that. It was preparation for what was to come. When it comes to engagement, target profile is everything, and the mech is the biggest target. When you want to really ambush an enemy force, you approach smallest to biggest in terms of target profile. That means infantry, then the APCs, then me. I had taken point behind the scouts, and I now waited for A Company's APCs to move into the middle and deploy them. When everyone is in position, we all move up as a cohesive group. Anything too tough for them, the APCs light up. Anything too big for A Company or the APCs, I light up. Sometimes you are itching to go first, but sometimes it really pays to be the heavy muscle on station at the back to bring up the rear. Like in Elise, I came real close, but this time I had the backup to make the difference. The RPG hit the top left stabilizer. By the time I saw the shooter, the infantry had already dropped him. As I said before, infantry in support of machines, and machines in support of infantry. I was called on to engage and destroy a technical. 13 minutes since operation start. 5 minutes since engaging the OP line. We don't know if the main enemy line has been signaled, if they can provide resistance. This is where speed is vital.
Be advised, aerial recon is repositioning. Forward units move up and cover for its absence. Amber 2, we're showing you low on fuel and ammo. RTB and rearm and refuel.
A Company's squads had dismounted to engage the OP line, so while their APCs moved up and they mounted back up, B Company would advance ahead, ripple forward, always cycle the infantry units, dismount, attack, advance with the next, dismount and attack, and so on. From the Fires Battalion within the brigade, we also had artillery. We could have used them to flatten the outpost line, but they would be more useful here squashing the main line instead. At this time, the battalion's mobile mortar vehicles can move up as well.
We have good visual on enemy's main line. Amber 1, designate targets for fire support. All Bravo Victors, move forward and dismount to engage.
The mech's height makes it a very solid fire support vehicle. Not as good as a dedicated fire support vehicle, but good enough for this. A tall visual sensors mast to call fire down on enemy positions. Our speed was good, they'd had no time to hunker down well, and this would explicitly thin them out. At this point, C Company's units move in. They would fill in our forces once we take the enemy's main line, or support us should we need to back out. Right danger close, the artillery fell and the guys moved in, and I kept an eye on them. Once they've begun engaging, I can do my support thing. Gun Griffin doesn't become so much of a target for enemy units when there's infantry making their day hell already. It lets me be the benefit of CAS or close fire support, but I can be on station non-stop. Priority targets are any armor or vehicles present.
Be advised, enemy artillery has been spotted in the area. We are retasking fire support for a counterstrike. There will be no fire support available at this time.
With the RD tied up, all close air support was my job. We had penetrated and broken the enemy's main defense line.
Amber 1 and Bravo Victors have taken the enemy's main line of defense. Hold that position. Amber 3, RTB to rearm and refuel.
But now was the time for my real job.
Amber 1, enemy armored platoon is moving in from the northeast. Proceed to engage.
In a momentum-based battle, you do not let your enemy build up too much force, or they will break all your lines. The time to counterattack was when they had just expended their energy on your main line and were most depleted. Which for us unfortunately meant right now. The first boost, the element of surprise, from 2.5 to 3 kilometers out, identify the enemy targets and engage. The first shot was good, a good center mass shot, right in the first armored unit. Terrain bounce. The shot went up through the bottom of the armor after skipping on the ground in front of it. Good penetration. I'd love to say it was all skill and not luck. 6 targets total, 2 heavy armor, 2 lighter armor, mixed tanks and IFV with anti-tank guided missile. Now land and reposition. Do not linger in any one spot to make it too easy for them to nail you. After relocating 50 to 300 meters, engage again. 2 fires means 2 kills. Good. The trick with any boost is to know how long to hang up there and when to come down. Try to hit 1 target per boost. And why should you not linger? That is why. A falling shot, difficult, but a detonation. That means 3 targets down. The key with boosting is that you have to constantly apply pressure as well. You can't be so defensive that they get a good chance to nail your position and zero you in. Every boost is a battle between your ability to jump, identify target, compensate, and fire, and to do so without giving your enemy the ability to do the same, be it with ATGM or 120mm guns or artillery. Once more, reposition. Target is tank obscured behind tree cover. A few potential hits. Time to change things up. The first few boosts were 2-dimensional, up and down, left and right, but that's it. It's time for a 3-dimensional attack. Adjust your heading to angle and avoid fire. Kite. Make it hard for them to hit you. Adios. 4 targets down, 2 remaining. At this point things are real tense. Lots of obscuring smoke, flames, and wrecks. The 2 last targets have concealed themselves amongst them. This was my time to shine. Just such a moment. This is how you tackle armor. This is the real thrill of a dangerous opponent as a threat. Always make sure your landing area is clear of enemy line of sight or fire and free of clutter. They were hiding behind the smoke. The missile wasn't locking, but fuck it. I'll guide this one in manually. One last shot from him, but it's too late, buddy. One shot. Center mass. 2 shots. Another hit on the hull. 3 shots. Vehicle crew dismount. 4. Turret ammo rack hit. Detonation. That was all of them.
All hostiles eliminated. I repeat, all hostiles eliminated. Amber 1, I've got a chili mac with your name on it.
As lethal as it was, it's not hard to feel pride in knowing you can take out this number and still survive. This is what I had trained for, and this is what I was good at. And I was damn proud of it. The Angolan Civil War concluded swiftly. In only 3.5 weeks, the combined forces of UN MOSAF and the Loyalist government units had routed and broken the coup. Their momentum collapsed quickly in the face of more advanced organization. In the end, this success, while enjoyed, was still only a smaller victory amongst troubled times. Whereas, had it taken place merely a decade beforehand, it would have received much higher praise. The only significant element to note was that certain trade and shipping investigations revealed potential connections to Chinese-invested airports, with certain coup members also having fielded Chinese-built APCs and firearms during the coup. Later, certain coup leaders were suspected of fleeing via these routes as well. In the West, this fueled the allegations that China had instigated the coup. This was a bold claim. The reality, though, was China had already invested multiple billions of dollars into infrastructure projects across Africa. In some ways, it was hard for the coup forces not to touch some branch of this network. While some weapons and vehicles may have been used, the more likely reality is China saw the event as a means of gaining valuable combat experience for some of their many new and untested weapons and platforms. What this meant was that China was simply offering a better deal to Africa. Mass infrastructure like airports, railways, and highways vastly decreased shipping costs for goods and trade. They vastly bolstered quality of life. In return, China would get preferential trade deals. It's likely the weapons may have merely been a bargaining chip in any number of a dozen such investments across the continent. When these details came out in full, and the allegations were fired, it was said that China was aiding in the destabilization of Africa and its neo-colonial politics. China then accused the West of using UNMOSAF as a colonial force to beat Africa to the West's economic and political desires. The tragedy of this, though, was that it was more or less the continuation of the past. Africa was once again denied its own voice. What had been seen once as a land of brutal, backward savages by Imperial Europe, then became the starving, pot-bellied, or emaciated child desperately needing the neoliberal Western aid for basic food and shelter. Now it was simply a new battleground of perception, between China's rising influence decrying the colonialism of Europe and the West, and the West's mirror complaint on the underhanded subversion and control of Africa's nations by China. The hypocrisy and irony of both drowned out Africa's own identity. It was growing. It would one day have its voice, but for now it had to carefully play its hand between these two spheres of influence, amongst others. For UNMOSAF at least, this leg of their journey was over. The Okinawa and the rest of UNMOSAF's support fleet left Angola's ports and would transit the Pillars of Hercules. Amber 1 would airlift out to Aviano Air Force Base for their next deployment. For now, Africa's part in this story was concluded.